I wouldn't have said so, no. Not really. But no, I don't get the feeling that she's wildly optimistic about life. A pragmatist, I think.
Princess Anne did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Standing before a silent room, the Princess Royal delivered one sentence that instantly changed the balance of power inside the monarchy. Camilla would retain the title of Queen, but her position within the Royal Family Council was being reduced, her independent authority suspended, and several ceremonial responsibilities reassigned. What followed was not merely embarrassment. It was the beginning of a deeply personal royal reckoning. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Anne held the prepared statement firmly as the silence deepened around her. The specially arranged briefing at St. James's Palace had been called with almost no warning, and every senior courtier understood the meaning of the two empty places beside her. Charles was absent. Camilla was absent. Their missing presence made the announcement feel less like a routine palace update and more like a controlled separation. St. James's Palace, one of the monarchy's oldest working royal buildings, often hosts formal meetings and official announcements when the crown wants every word to carry institutional weight. The Princess Royal then made the decision unmistakably clear. Camilla had been removed from the internal decision-making group of the Royal Family Council, the private body used by senior royals to coordinate duties and settle major family matters. She could no longer represent the crown independently at selected state functions, meaning official occasions carried out on behalf of the monarch. Several ceremonial responsibilities would now pass to Catherine and Anne herself. The Queen would keep her title, but the authority surrounding it had been cut back with brutal precision. Anne paused before the final sentence. Her fingers tightened around the paper, and for one brief moment, the discipline in her face gave way to something heavier. She did not look victorious. She looked burdened. Every word had come from a documented palace statement approved for release. Yet the language closely matched recommendations she had submitted weeks earlier. She had not merely broken her silence. She had helped shape the decision she was now announcing. Camilla received the statement at Clarence House through a private secretary who read every line aloud. She remained still until the reading ended, then slowly removed her glasses and asked one question. Had Charles personally approved every word? The aide answered yes. The king's authorization appeared beneath the directive, leaving no room for denial and no easy target for her anger. William had already been informed. Catherine had already been asked to prepare for two of the duties being transferred. That sequence revealed the most painful truth of all. The transition had been organized before Camilla was formally told. The Queen Consort had not been invited into the final discussion about her own position. Camilla finally rose and requested a private meeting with Anne. No aides, no secretaries, no prepared statements. The announcement had stripped away the palace's careful language. But behind the closed doors of Clarence House, the real question was no longer what she had lost. It was who had decided she could no longer be trusted with it. The decision appeared institutional, but its deepest wounds were personal. For Camilla, the reduction threatened the position she had spent decades fighting to secure. For Anne, it revived an old belief that loyalty to the crown must come before affection. Catherine carried a different burden. She was not simply being promoted. She was being placed at the center of a conflict capable of dividing a family, already weakened by suspicion. Camilla's influence had never depended on ceremonial rank alone. Her real strength came from constant access to Charles, a place in private discussions, and the belief that her words carried the monarch's confidence. Ceremonial rank meant the formal place a royal held during official duties, but influence inside the palace often moved through quieter channels. For years, the Queen Consort had understood those channels better than almost anyone. Now, the doors remained open to her title while closing around her authority. Camilla sat alone with the red dispatch box resting before her. The locked container was normally used to carry confidential royal papers, including official correspondence and council material. She placed one hand across its lid and held it there, as though touching it might delay what had already happened. That box would no longer contain documents prepared for her review. After several silent moments, she called an aide and asked for it to be removed. Her voice remained steady. Her hand did not. Anne viewed the same loss through a colder lens. The Princess Royal had always measured service through discipline, restraint, and obedience to clear authority. She did not believe closeness to the sovereign gave anyone permission to act beyond defined limits. Affection could shape private choices, but it could not replace procedure. That belief had guided her for years, and now it had placed her directly against Camilla. Catherine received her revised schedule without celebration. The document named her as the Crown's representative at a major Commonwealth reception, an official gathering involving nations that maintain historic ties with the monarchy. She read the page twice before asking William whether accepting the duty would make it appear that she had helped remove Camilla. The princess feared the promotion would look less like service and more like victory. William chose his words carefully. He told his wife that refusing would not protect the queen. It would only weaken Charles' decision and suggest that the family no longer trusted the king's judgment. Yet the future monarch felt no triumph. He understood that every new responsibility placed in Catherine's hands came from another woman's public humiliation. Anne had already recorded the disputes that brought them there. Her private file included altered guest lists, ceremonial interventions, and direct instructions issued without full council approval. Charles had read every page. He had not rejected the account, destroyed it, or returned it to his sister. Instead, the monarch had ordered a second review. That choice revealed the fracture no one wanted to name. The king was no longer dismissing concerns about his wife. He was testing whether they were true. Camilla believed years of private disagreements had finally been used against her. But Anne knew the decision had not begun with history. One incident at Windsor had changed everything. And once the Princess Royal understood what had happened in that room, silence no longer felt like loyalty. Every palace crisis has a moment that later feels inevitable. The instant when irritation becomes alarm and private disagreement becomes an issue of royal authority. For this conflict, that moment came inside Windsor Castle during preparations for a national remembrance service. One chair was moved. One name disappeared from the program. And one instruction, delivered in Camilla's voice without the king's knowledge, convinced Princess Anne that the queen had crossed a boundary the monarchy could no longer pretend not to see. Camilla entered the planning meeting with a folder already marked in red. 3 weeks remained before Anne's public statement, and Charles was elsewhere in the castle, attending a medical briefing. The sovereign's remembrance service was a formal national ceremony honoring sacrifice under the monarch's name, so every reading, procession place, military role, and royal position carried symbolic weight. Anne, Catherine, Edward, and senior household officials had gathered because one alteration could change how authority was understood. Camilla opened the program and announced that Catherine's central reading would be reassigned to a representative from her own household. She then drew a line through the princess's name and moved Anne's ceremonial chair away from the king's position. A ceremonial chair was not simply a seat. Its placement showed closeness to the sovereign during an official event. The queen consort called the changes a reflection of the queen's authority, and the room fell still. Catherine watched the ink cut across her name. Her expression tightened, but she refused to challenge Camilla in front of the officials. She said only that she would follow whatever arrangement Charles had authorized. The calm words protected the king's dignity, yet they also forced the true question into the open. Had he approved any of this? Anne slowly pushed the altered seating plan back across the table. She asked Camilla directly whether the monarch had reviewed the changes. The queen closed the folder and replied that Charles did not need to examine every decision made in his name. That answer changed everything. Anne no longer saw a personal insult. She saw marital access being used as a substitute for direct royal approval. Edward found his sister afterward and confirmed what she feared. Charles had approved the original program and knew nothing about Catherine's removal or Anne's changed position. His account turned a tense family dispute into an unauthorized use of the sovereign's authority. Anne carried the marked plan straight to the king. Charles studied the crossed-out names, removed his glasses, and asked everyone except his sister to leave. He said nothing for several long moments. The silence told her that he understood the danger. 48 hours later, the monarch authorized a confidential review of every council decision Camilla had made during the previous 6 months. The Windsor meeting had exposed the breach, but the confrontation ahead would reveal something worse. The queen did not believe she had crossed the line at all. There were no courtiers to soften the language, and no palace secretary to interrupt when tempers rose. Camilla entered the private drawing room expecting an explanation. Anne arrived carrying the original Windsor program. Between them stood years of guarded civility, unspoken resentment, and two opposing beliefs about what service to the crown required. When the door closed, the queen demanded her authority back. The Princess Royal answered with 5 words that ended every pretense of family harmony. Camilla placed her handbag on a chair but remained standing. She asked whether Anne had designed the restrictions herself and whether the public humiliation had been part of the plan from the beginning. The private drawing room offered no formal protection, because such a room was meant for personal meetings rather than official council business. Here, neither woman could hide behind ceremony. The queen wanted a direct answer, and the princess gave her one. Anne held Camilla's gaze. "You had no right to use him that way." She meant Charles. His name had been attached to decisions he had never reviewed, and that accusation struck the queen at the deepest point of her marriage. Camilla had spent years believing that protecting the king was part of loving him. Now, that same closeness was being described as misuse. Camilla rejected the charge with controlled fury. She said Charles had been exhausted, overwhelmed, and buried beneath duties no one else fully understood. She had stepped in because the monarchy could not pause whenever the sovereign needed rest. In her mind, those interventions were not ambition, they were loyalty. She had acted, she insisted, because her husband needed someone willing to carry what he could not. Anne refused to soften. Royal authority, she explained, could not be borrowed through marriage. It meant the legal and ceremonial power exercised in the monarch's name, and access to the sovereign did not give anyone unrestricted control over crown business. She accepted Camilla's title. She did not accept the idea that affection could replace approval. Camilla seized the Windsor program from Anne's hand. She stared at Catherine's crossed-out name, then tore the page in half. The Princess Royal did not flinch. She opened her folder and placed a duplicate copy on the table. Anne then revealed what the review had found. 4 other instructions had been issued under Charles's authority without his direct approval. One altered the delegation for a state banquet, an official dinner held for visiting national leaders. Another canceled Edward's military appearance without consulting him. The pattern was no longer possible to dismiss. Camilla's anger collapsed. She asked whether Charles had seen every document. Anne answered yes. The queen's voice fell almost to a whisper as she asked why her husband had allowed his sister to announce the decision. Anne told her the truth. The king could not bring himself to do it personally. Camilla had entered prepared to fight Anne, but she left confronting something far worse. The man who could have saved her position had already chosen not to use his power. The palace could blame procedure, council rules, or the recommendations of senior advisors, but none of those forces could reduce the queen's position without one final act. Charles had signed the directive himself. The same man who had defended Camilla through public hostility, family resistance, and decades of controversy had placed his name beneath the order restricting her authority. Yet the signature did not reveal whether the king had acted freely or whether pressure from Anne and William had left him no alternative. Charles sat alone in his private study after Anne's announcement. He reread the directive slowly, then touched the line bearing his signature before placing the paper back on the desk. A royal directive was a written order carrying the monarch's authority, which meant every restriction on Camilla existed because he had approved it. The clock sounded across the room. The king did not move. No advisor, no counsel, and no relative could carry the final responsibility for him. The betrayal cut in 2 directions. Charles felt wounded that Camilla had used his name on decisions he had never reviewed, yet he understood the fear behind her actions. She had watched him struggle with exhaustion and believed she was protecting him from minor burdens. The queen had seen intervention as care. The monarch now saw how easily care had become control. William had refused to let that distinction disappear. During the final discussion, the prince told his father that protecting Camilla from consequences would cast doubt over every future instruction issued by the palace. Staff would no longer know whether an order came from the sovereign or from someone speaking through him. The future king remained respectful, but he would not soften the danger simply because the person involved was family. Catherine had taken no part in the final decision. She had neither requested Camilla's duties nor voted on the restructuring. Charles chose her because he believed she could carry public authority without trying to dominate private decisions. That trust mattered, but it also placed the princess in a painful position. Her rise would be measured against another woman's fall. Charles first proposed a temporary suspension lasting 3 months. Anne rejected it. She warned that a brief pause would look like hesitation rather than correction, allowing the same confusion to return once public attention faded. William supported permanent reform, but he insisted that Camilla keep her title and charitable patronages. A patronage was an official link between a royal and a public cause, and preserving those roles would prevent complete disgrace. Charles lifted his fountain pen but did not sign. He asked whether the order would destroy his marriage. Anne answered without cruelty. Refusing to sign might damage the crown he had sworn to protect. The king lowered the pen. The directive became final. His signature settled the question of authority, but paper could not contain the human damage. By the next morning, Camilla would discover exactly what her diminished position looked like in public. Camilla understood the wording of the directive, but its true meaning became clear only when the royal car failed to arrive. She had dressed for the Commonwealth reception, reviewed her remarks, and waited beside the entrance at Clarence House. Then a private secretary entered carrying a revised schedule. Catherine would attend in her place. The Queen's speech had been removed, her escort reassigned, and the public duty she expected to lead had vanished without a single camera witnessing her preparation. Camilla read the revised page without speaking. The Commonwealth reception was an official gathering bringing together representatives from nations linked through the Commonwealth, so attendance carried more than social importance. Whoever represented the crown would be seen as carrying the monarch's trust. This was the first major engagement affected by the new restrictions, and Catherine had been instructed to attend beside William instead. The Queen looked toward the clock, then down at the unused speech resting on the table. She reached for the sapphire brooch chosen for the evening, unfastened it slowly, and placed it back inside its case. That small act carried the weight of surrender. Camilla had prepared to speak for the monarchy. Now, even the words she had rehearsed belonged to a role she no longer held. Camilla asked her secretary whether Catherine had known in advance. The answer came carefully. The Princess of Wales had received confirmation only that morning. The explanation should have brought relief, but it did not. The Queen could not decide whether the younger woman was innocent, or whether the palace had simply protected her from the most damaging part of the plan. Catherine entered the royal car with visible unease. She told William that every photograph from the reception would be treated as evidence that she had replaced Camilla, regardless of how the decision had been made. The prince reminded his wife that refusing the duty would create a second crisis, yet he understood her fear. Their success that evening would be measured against the Queen's humiliation. Palace staff received new written protocols before the event began. A protocol was a formal rule explaining how official decisions must be handled, and the new order required any instruction involving Camilla to carry direct authorization from Charles or Anne. Verbal requests from the Queen's household would no longer be enough. Several courtiers quietly welcomed the change. They had previously received conflicting orders from Camilla's office and the king's private secretary, leaving them unsure whose command carried legal weight. One senior aide refused the new structure and resigned rather than accept reassignment away from the Queen. The departure proved that Camilla still had loyalists who viewed the restrictions as a deliberate campaign against her. Charles called after the reception began. Camilla watched the telephone ring across the room but did not answer. The sound stopped, and the silence returned heavier than before. That unanswered call forced the king to face Anne again, not over authority, but over something more painful. Had they protected the crown, or punished Camilla beyond what duty required, the restrictions had restored order inside the palace, yet the empty place beside Charles created a new danger. A correction meant to defend the monarchy was beginning to resemble personal abandonment. Late that night, Charles asked Anne to meet him without secretaries, uniforms, briefing papers, or the language of royal procedure. For once, they spoke not as sovereign and princess royal, but as brother and sister. The king admitted that Camilla had stopped answering his calls. Anne admitted that hearing her own statement repeated across the country had felt colder than she intended. In that private room, duty remained firm, but judgment finally made space for compassion. Charles waited in a small library at Windsor and poured 2 glasses of water himself. The gesture was ordinary, but its meaning was not. A sovereign usually met senior royals through carefully managed channels, yet he wanted no formal structure between them. He wanted his sister's honesty, and Anne understood that this conversation was no longer about council procedure. It was about the damage left behind. Charles told her that Camilla believed the family had used her as a shield for his own decision. The Queen thought he had allowed Anne to speak because he lacked the courage to face her himself. The king did not deny it. By making his sister deliver the announcement, he had protected himself from the most painful part of the judgment, while forcing both women to carry the conflict in public. Anne listened without interruption. She admitted that the wording had been deliberately sharp because vague restrictions would have been challenged, delayed, or quietly ignored. Yet the Princess Royal also accepted a harder truth. Clarity could become cruelty when it offered no path back to dignity. Camilla had needed boundaries, but she had also been left with the impression that the family wanted her erased. Anne refused to reverse the council changes. The Royal Family Council was the private group through which senior members coordinated duties and major internal decisions, and restoring Camilla's former place would make the entire review meaningless. It would also tell palace staff that discipline disappeared whenever consequences became emotionally uncomfortable. Anne proposed something different. Camilla would lose power, but not purpose. She could keep a clearly defined public mission through literacy work, support for victims of domestic violence, and selected joint engagements beside Charles. Those causes had long carried personal meaning for the Queen, and preserving them would show that accountability did not require exile. Charles then revealed what he had failed to confront earlier. Camilla had asked him to formalize her authority months before because she feared becoming irrelevant as William and Catherine took on greater roles. He had delayed answering, hoping the anxiety would pass. Instead, silence had allowed fear to harden into overreach. Charles reached for paper and wrote a personal note. No directive, no official language. He asked Camilla to meet him as his wife, not as the Queen defending her office. Anne agreed to speak with her again. She would not apologize for protecting the crown, but she would acknowledge the humiliation caused by the method. Inside Windsor, the family had finally found language gentler than command, yet beyond those walls, the country was already turning Camilla's reduced position into a national verdict. By sunrise, the private struggle had become a public spectacle. Broadcasters replayed Anne's measured delivery, commentators examined every pause, and newspapers transformed a carefully worded restructuring into a royal downfall. Some praised the Princess Royal for defending discipline. Others saw a queen publicly diminished by the very family she had served. Then one image appeared across every major broadcast: Camilla's unused royal car leaving Clarence House empty, while crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace demanding to know who now spoke for the crown. Anne opened the morning newspaper and found herself beneath 4 brutal words: "The Queen without power." The front page showed her standing at the lectern during the documented palace announcement. Her expression controlled while the headline turned discipline into destruction. A lectern was the raised stand used for formal public statements, but on that morning it looked less like a place of duty and more like the point from which Camilla's fall had been declared. Anne folded the newspaper once and placed it beside her untouched breakfast. Edward sat across from her, watching his sister struggle with a consequence she had not intended. The princess admitted that the headline was harsher than the actual decision. She had announced limits on authority, not the erasure of a woman. Yet the Duke reminded her that public judgment rarely respected careful distinctions once emotion took control. Camilla watched the same crisis unfold from Clarence House. A national broadcaster described the restructuring as the most significant internal redistribution of royal authority of the modern reign, while repeatedly showing Catherine arriving beside William at the Commonwealth reception. The Queen then saw footage of her unused car leaving the residence without her. She turned off the television before the commentator finished. That image made her isolation look complete. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace as the argument spread. Some applauded Anne for protecting the monarchy from confused lines of command. Others held photographs of Camilla and accused the palace of humiliating her before she had been allowed to defend herself. Buckingham Palace was the monarch's principal official residence and the public symbol of royal authority, so every chant at its gates carried directly into the national debate. William refused to let the family appear triumphant. He warned senior staff that celebrating Catherine's new duties would turn necessary reform into a campaign of personal destruction. The prince understood that his wife's success could not be presented as proof of Camilla's defeat. Catherine agreed, insisting that no one in her household use the word replacement. Charles answered the growing anger with a second palace statement. It confirmed that Camilla would remain queen and continue her principal charitable work, including literacy and support for victims of domestic violence. The clarification proved that the king had accepted Anne's proposal. Purpose would remain, but council power would not return. Public debate slowly changed. The question was no longer whether Camilla had fallen. It was whether accountability could exist without exile. Camilla finally left Clarence's house and traveled to Windsor. The world had already delivered its judgment, but the verdict that mattered most would be spoken without cameras. When she sat across from Charles and Anne, Camilla entered Windsor expecting either an apology or a final rejection. She received neither. Charles did not withdraw his signature, and Anne did not abandon the principles behind her statement. Instead, the three of them confronted the truth the palace had avoided. The Queen had used influence beyond the limits of her position, but the family had answered that failure with a public severity that nearly erased the woman behind the title. The final settlement would preserve the decision and restore a measure of dignity. Charles sat opposite his wife without advisors beside him. Anne remained near the end of the table, while the signed directive rested untouched on a side table. The document was the formal order that reduced Camilla's authority, and its presence made one fact unmistakable. This meeting was not about reversal. It was about whether the family could accept what had happened without destroying itself. Camilla spoke first. She told Charles that losing power had hurt, but discovering he could not face her himself had hurt more. The Queen had endured public judgment before, yet this wound came from the man whose loyalty had once carried her through it. The king accepted the accusation. He admitted that he had allowed Anne to carry the emotional burden of a decision only he had the authority to make. Anne did not retreat from her position. She told Camilla that invoking the sovereign's name without permission had endangered every official expected to obey it. The Princess Royal then acknowledged her own failure. Her documented announcement had turned a complicated breach of trust into a single public humiliation, leaving the Queen little room to explain the fear behind her actions. Camilla would not return to the Royal Family Council's decision-making group. She could no longer authorize ceremonial changes independently, or represent the crown at selected state functions without Charles' approval. The council was the private body used by senior royals to coordinate duties and major family decisions, so exclusion from it placed a firm boundary around her future influence. Camilla accepted a newly defined role instead. She would continue supporting literacy, victims of domestic violence, and carefully selected joint engagements beside the king. Her title would remain, but its practical limits would now be clear. Camilla then removed the torn Windsor program from her handbag and placed it before Anne. She admitted that crossing out Catherine's name had not served the crown. It had come from fear that William and the princess were moving forward, while she slowly became invisible. Anne reached across the table and took the damaged page. She did not excuse the act. Camilla did not ask her to. The gesture signaled neither friendship nor surrender, only the return of honest respect. Catherine accepted greater ceremonial responsibility without claiming victory. William supported the new structure, while ordering staff to protect Camilla's dignity at every future appearance. Princess Anne's decision had not destroyed Camilla's place within the monarchy. It had ended an undefined power that blurred love, access, and authority. The Queen lost influence. Charles lost the comfort of avoiding confrontation. Anne accepted the loneliness of enforcing duty. The crown survived because the family finally chose clear boundaries over private convenience. They remained wounded, but they no longer pretended affection alone could justify authority. Princess Anne's silence ended with a devastating announcement, but its lasting meaning was not revenge. It was accountability, and the painful proof that the monarchy could preserve both duty and human dignity only by refusing to confuse one with the other. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.